These are the G4 notes on angles formed by parallel, intersecting, and perpendicular lines. If you have two lines in the same plane, the two lines will have one of the following relationships. They could be intersecting, which just means that they cross each other. They could be perpendicular, which means they are two lines or segments that cross each other and form right angles or 90-degree angles. Or they could be parallel, which are two lines that are equal distance apart and do not ever intersect. So here are your examples. Right now I want you to pause the video and then write down if you think the following from 1 through 5 are intersecting, perpendicular, or parallel. Then we will press play and we'll check over the answers. All right, so let's go over the answers. Question 1, these are intersecting because they will eventually cross. Question 2 is perpendicular. They intersect at 90-degree angles. Question 3 would be intersecting. Question 4, those are parallel. They'll never intersect. And question 5 are intersecting. They do cross each other. We're also going to review 4 types of angles that you probably talked about last year in 7th grade. So down here at the bottom we have acute angles, which are angles that are less than 90 degrees. Obtuse angles, angles that are greater than 90 degrees but less than 180 degrees. Right angles, which are exactly equal to 90 degrees. And straight angles, which equal 180 degrees. Turn your notes to the next page. Angles formed by intersecting lines also have special names and may have special properties. Congruent means two or more angles that have the same measure. This is the symbol for congruent. It's an equal sign with a little squiggle on the top. It means that two angle measurements are equal to the same measurement. So if we have ACB at 29 degrees, that is congruent to CDE, which is also 29 degrees. We can say that the measurements are equal to each other, but we have to say that the angles are congruent because they're not exactly the same angles. Complementary angles are two angles whose sum is exactly 90 degrees. So an example would be CBD, which is 57, and ABC, 33, which add up together to be 90 degrees. Those are complementary. Supplementary angles are two angles whose sum is exactly 180 degrees. So we have KLN and KLM, which add up together to be 180 degrees. Those are supplementary. Sometimes students have a hard time remembering the difference between complementary and supplementary. One way that you can remember is complementary is earlier in the alphabet. The letter C comes first, and 90 comes before 180. Also, the letter S comes later in the alphabet, and 180 is a bigger measurement. So that might help you remember that complementary goes with 90 and supplementary is 180. Right now, I want you to pause the video and practice questions 6 through 11, and then I want you to press play to check your answers. You're going to determine if the following angles are congruent, complementary, supplementary, or none of the above. Press pause now. All right, let's check your answers. Question 6, those would be congruent. They are the same measurement. Question 7 is supplementary. Question 8, those are complementary. They add up to 90 degrees. Question 9 is neither. Question 10, supplementary. They add up to 180. And question 11, those are neither. They don't add up to 90 or 180, and they're also not congruent. Turn your notes to the next page. Now we're going to talk about some special types of angles, which you may or may not have heard of before. Special types of angles are formed when you have a transversal, which is a line that's actually intersecting through two other lines. So right here we have our transversal. It's going right through those two parallel lines. When a transversal goes through parallel lines, a lot of special angles are formed. The first one we're going to talk about would be vertical angles. These are two angles that are opposite from each other and are formed by intersecting lines. They are always congruent to each other. So here we have angle A and angle B. They are right across from each other. Those are vertical angles, and they will have the same measurement. Corresponding angles are angles that occupy the same position when a line intersects two other lines. They are always congruent. So here you can see we have two corresponding angles. They're on the bottom right of the intersection. So same location, different intersection. Another example, the bottom left of each of the intersections, the top right of each of the intersections, and the top left. So whenever you have two parallel lines cut by one transversal, you will always have four pairs of corresponding angles, and they are congruent to each other. The last one we're going to talk about on this page would be adjacent angles. Adjacent is a word you may have heard in language arts class. It just means next to. So these are angles that are side by side, and they share a common side between them. So just these two angles right here are adjacent. They're right next to each other, so they actually form one bigger angle together. Turn to the last page of your notes. The next kind of angles we're going to talk about are alternate interior angles. It's called alternate because they're on alternate sides of the transversal, so opposite sides of the transversal, and they're called interior because they are inside of the parallel lines. They are always congruent to each other. And they also always form the letter Z or a backwards letter Z. Alternate exterior angles are similar, but instead of being inside of the parallel, they are on opposite sides of the transversal outside of the parallel. They are also congruent, so they're on opposite sides of the transversal outside of the parallels. The following diagram shows the relationships between the angles when there are two parallel lines cut by a transversal. You'll notice that you have this 180 minus x. All four of these are always going to be the same. These are vertical from each other and also corresponding below. The other angles are going to be represented by x, which means that the angles that are adjacent to each other will always form a line which equals a total of 180 degrees, which means they're supplementary.